This is Super Investors and the Art of Worldly Wisdom. I'm Jesse Felder.
Object to the test!
South Garden for the 142!
Warren Buffett.
Carl Icahn.
John Templeton.
Buy low, sell high. Fear, that's the other guy's problem.
Dan Druckenmiller.
George Soros.
Paul Peter Jones.
Peter Lynch. You ever wonder why fund managers can't beat the S&P 500? Because they're sheep. And sheep get slaughtered.
I left Wall Street in 2000. I guess that was about 17 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. The reason I left was that I just could not find an ethical way to pursue my passion for the markets within the industry. A few years later, I came across Todd Harrison and Minionville, which in his words was a community of people who were good at what they do and better at who they are. This really resonated with me, and over the past decade plus, I've really just learned a ton from Todd, so I'm really excited to have him as my guest for this episode. In this conversation, we talk about how Todd got his start in the business, his evolution as a trader, his experience working with Jim Cramer. But as usual, I used this opportunity to really dig into Todd's process. He discusses his 4 legs of the trading table, which has been immensely valuable to my own process. We also dig deep into what he sees as the greatest investment opportunity of the next decade. Todd recently started a new hedge fund to take advantage of what he sees as the next big thing, cannabis wellness. We talk about some of his favorite ideas in the space and how he's approaching it as a professional investor. So I really hope you enjoy my conversation with Todd Harrison. Hey Todd, welcome to the show. It's really I'm really excited to have you here today. It's you've been a hero of mine in the industry for a long time, and I'm just really excited to be able to pick your brain and tease out some of the information that I've wanted to for a long period of time. So thanks for doing this.
And thank you for having me, Jesse. You're not so bad yourself.
Thanks. Yeah. So let's just start in the beginning. How did you get into finance? Did you start at Morgan Stanley?
I started at Morgan Stanley. For better or for worse, I circumvented the training program. So I ended up on the equity derivatives desk back in '91, the Monday after I graduated. And it was, it was learn feet by the fire, learn as you go. I was armed with the Black-Scholes model and a Wall Street Journal, neither of which did much good, understanding the nuances of equity derivatives. And you have to understand, back in the day, not to date myself, but I was drawing the risk up in T accounts for the head of the desk. So the industry's come a long way.
So it was basically equity options desk. So were you prop trading, or was this you just kind of making a market for customers? Or
No, it was prop trading. I had a book. I actually I came into the business, and thanks to the people on the desk, good people who I still talk with to this day. They took me under their wing and taught me the ropes, and I ended up taking down the biotech book and the financials book. And if you remember, this was back when the financials really went through that mass consolidation, Hugh McCall, Nations Bank, and so forth, and Chemical and Chase and all that jazz. So really got a good handle on the space and on the biotech space. Two different ways to trade those two sectors.
Gotcha. I get a lot of questions from people who are wanting to get into the industry. How did you get the job in the first place?
Well, back then it was much more of a relationship business, and I think today it still is a relationship business. It's just harder to find, the good people, given that so many of them have been replaced by computers. But I do believe it's a relationship business, and it's a networking business, and it was a bit of happenstance, serendipity, call it what you will, that I got onto the desk. And it was just about once you have the opportunity, the single most important thing, and I still tell this to people when they're coming up in the business, is you find somebody who you trust and that you can rely on and who will get your back, and you fly under your own wings. And that's ultimately a meritocracy that I think still, while it's been diluted by central bank policy, and I won't really get on that tangent, but I do believe meritocracy is sort of the backbone of the capital markets, and by extension the backbone of the success of individuals in the capital markets.
So relationship business. you one of the things I've been thinking about and getting ready to talk to you is you have so many great trading aphorisms, and I'm kind of jumping ahead faster than I wanted to. But did you have a mentor that kind of instilled a lot of this stuff in you? I mean, where did this stuff come from?
No, not really. The mentors I had early on were focused particularly on trading. I've always had a very active mind, active imagination, which is great for creativity, not so good for sleeping. But it was always, these phrases would come up in my head, and I don't know if some of them were used before. I'm sure a lot of them were. But regardless, I think, it's sort of evolved out of the fact that the observation that we've entered into this ADD, immediate gratification mindset across the world with digital media and all of the connectivity. And if you want to get a point across, you have to make it quick, as opposed to making it louder, which has never really been my style. So yeah, there are some good ones, I agree. But, it's really, it's the key to connecting with people is really holding up a mirror to their self. That's one of the keys to advertising, or the foundational constructs of advertising. But I think, as a writer or as somebody who, wants to build community, you have to really have a genuine sort of reflection. People need to see that within themselves. And, the one thing that stuck out to me, particularly throughout the process of creating Minionville, was that the common denominator in a lot of people who were part of our community where they were good at what they do, better at who they are. And I think a lot of the human capital, or the focus, or the respect for human capital in the finance equation, or really in any equation these days, has been lost in the shuffle. But I still think there's a lot of good people who believe in doing the right thing, who believe that their name is their word. They don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't steal, all that jazz. I think that, there are good people out there, and I think that's something to be thankful for.
Absolutely, and it's something that, honestly, you might be a little too generous with the industry and saying there's a lot of people out there like that. I find that that's a rare, way to look at it in our industry. But something that Warren Buffett has talked about, in any industry, wherever you work, it's, who you work with is one of the most important factors. You got to work with people you like and respect. And but I want to jump backwards a little bit.
You like the aphorism. So I've always said the definition of professional nirvana is to do what you love with people you respect while serving the greater good. And if you could check those three boxes, I think you're luckier than most.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely agree. And and in terms of the trading aphorisms, I'll put a link in the notes to this show to your 10 trading commandments. Those are things that just come up in my head all the time when I'm looking at the markets. There's just so many in there that have stuck with me. But
that's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, when we go back, you traded options for a long period of time, and I get people asking me too, that are interested in trading options. How can I get into this? What's your best piece of advice for new traders who are interested in trading options?
Well, I think there's a utility to paper trading, creating a model portfolio and trading it as an active portfolio. If you're new in the business, what I would say is to understand that it's a multilinear dynamic. And what I mean by that is there's a multitude of metrics which go into creating the supply-demand equilibrium in the marketplace. So the way I've sort of used, the structure I've used for my whole career was really to look at the market or a stock through four particular lenses, one of which is fundamentals, one of which is technicals, one of which is psychology, and one of which is structural, and just try to do the work on those four through those four lenses. And I think if you can get those four legs under the table, your odds of succeeding are much better. But it's a craft, and there's it's a very intricate maze, particularly now where we've been in this sort of blow off phase since last summer. It's tough to not be lured by the sexy sirens of, watching all your friends make money. But, and I say this to the benefit of the people who have only been trading since since 2009. Risk is a two-sided sword, right? Risk cuts both ways. So it's just understanding the duality of the market and not getting caught up in the next best thing, and always discipline over conviction.
And that's one of the 10 trading commandments. But I love your idea of the 4 legs to the stock market table. You mentioned them. Could you go into each one of those in a little more depth?
Sure. So let's see. I'm thinking if I should use an example, but I'll just use. I won't use an example. So I'll just say. So fundamentals, I think we all understand, right? It's basically the earnings, the balance sheet, the things that make up the molecular DNA of a company, right? And that's it's fundamental analysis is really probably the most tried and true methodology of trading. But I think it's one of four inputs that really dictate stock prices. The second one being technical analysis, and I don't know if technical analysis works because people follow it, or if people follow it because it works. I sense that it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy to a point, although in today's day and age, with all the algos shooting against levels, it's lost some of its utility. But certainly from a risk definition standpoint and to create context for your time horizon and risk profile, I think technicals are an integral part of a trading thesis. The third being psychology, and this is probably the most important. It's not what the market or a stock is doing; it's how people perceive it to be doing, and that's really understanding. I don't know if I could point to any one metric that I look at, but over the course of the last close to 30 years now, I've gotten a pretty good sense of how to kind of look at psychology, and really just from a sentiment standpoint and an offside standpoint. And when too many people are on one side of the boat, I like to go the other way. And it's a risky strategy, but it's one that I've utilized over the course of my career. And the last one is structural, and that's really just looking at what's going on in the government, the role of the central banks, money flows, and things of that nature. And all 4 of them, there are a lot of people who focus on each of those in particular and do pretty good for themselves. But by really marrying those 4 metrics into a process, I think you really cover a lot of bases. And through that lens, you get to look at price as opportunity rather than a hindrance. So, when your favorite position is down 20 points, you're looking at it as a 20% sale as opposed to, or whatever percent sale it is, as opposed to, getting caught the wrong way.
Gotcha. So I can't help but asking this again. This stuff just is so powerful to me, and it's had such a huge impact on my evolution as an investor, my growth. There wasn't a mentor. I mean, what were some of the resources? I mean, where did you learn a lot of this stuff? There books, other traders who passed along. I would love to. Listen, I had good mentors. I had folks like David Slane. I had folks like Jeff Sott, later in my career, who I consider a good friend. Finding good people, you ask where I get this from, and it really goes back to the notion of connectivity and community. I mean, particularly with Minionville and the ability to bring together these thought leaders in different sectors, different disciplines, again, good at what they do, better at who they are, and really to build that sort of that circle of trust, for lack of a better word, but to surround yourself with good people who, I always could tell who was a fit for Minionville, and by extension, a lot of deals I look at, if they, I had a lot of high profile people call me and they wanted to get involved, and they said, "What's in it for me?" And I said, "Well, nothing's in it for you, but there's a lot that we could do together. There's no limit to what we could do together, but it has to be viewed as a partnership, not not as a bank account, so to speak." And I think that's exactly what you accomplished with Minionville, is that community of just a pool of knowledge and a community of learning and sharing that wisdom. Was that your impetus behind starting Minionville in the first place?
No, it was not actually. So the impetus, I filled in for Jim Cramer the summer of 2000 because he was going on vacation, and I saw when he was, I heard him talking to his editor, and he said, "I don't know, I'm going to the Hamptons, and have you tried this guy? Have you tried that guy?" And then I saw him look over the desk at me, and he said, "I got it." And he asked me, and I said, "Jim, I'm managing 400 million, 200 positions. I really don't want to take on another role." He said, "Do it for one day." And I did it for one day on that Monday, and I actually enjoyed it. It was a good synthesis. I had a lot of fun with it. I wasn't trying to impress anybody, but the ability to pull in Grateful Dead lyrics or Uncle Buck references or pop culture, the lyrics that were double entendres for the market, right? And just being creative like that, because I think in finance, you lose a lot of that ability to really... to be as creative as you would ordinarily be. So it was fun for me, and it was a good synthesis, and it was a good, it was good for me to be able to kind of write it down, look at it, and from a discipline standpoint, adhere to my own words, as opposed to rationalizing risk, which I think everybody does at some point over the course of their career. I ended up finishing the week out, and sure enough, when I saw Jim, he was very happy about the performance of the page views, which I honestly didn't know. I didn't know really what page views were all about. This was back in Y2K, remember, and the beginning of really the whole internet bang. But I did it, and then ended up. He asked me to contribute a trading diary next to his diary on TheStreet.com, and I was happy to do it. It was a good outlet. It was a little bit complicated because Jim's style and my style are very different. So it was interesting to watch that dynamic. But nonetheless, I enjoyed it. And so my grandfather, Ruby Peck, got very ill the summer of 2000, and I would go down to Florida every weekend to hold his hand. He was my best friend. And, all the readers would write to me, "Oh, I hope you're enjoying the Hamptons. You're not here on a Friday." And so I eventually shared this story to kind of stop everybody from emailing me and saying, "I'm not going to Florida. I'm going to share, whatever time I have left with my grandfather." And lo and behold, probably got 1,000 emails from people talking about their love for their grandfather or their story. And it was very powerful. And I would take them to my grandfather and I would read them at his bedside. And it created this bond or this sense of duty, for me anyway, that I wanted to help them navigate what was a very tricky time in the markets. And then, sure enough, 9/11 happened. It was terrible for everybody. I'm not going to get into that story, but I decided that I didn't want to work there anymore, but I didn't want to lose the connectivity with these people who I've developed this bond with. Very strange, people joke I met them over the internet, but literally, scores of people. So when I decided not to work with The Street anymore after 9/11, I set out full throttle to create a community online to affect positive change through financial understanding. A couple months later, I could have opened a blog. Instead, I spent a king's ransom to build this platform. But nonetheless, for 15 years, it helped a lot of people over and through a lot of different markets. Financial crises, so be it. So spiritually, it was a great process, and I think I think that means something somewhere.
No, absolutely. And you talk about meeting people on the internet. I mean, that's how I met you. And for me, it was extremely valuable, the site and the community. But just to jump back in, the timeline, you mentioned, working with Jim Cramer. So you were at Morgan Stanley, and then how did you left Morgan Stanley to go work with Jim? Or
no,
I
left Morgan Stanley to go work at Galleon to run their derivative department. At the time, Galleon was a $500 million shop. A year and a half later, he was a couple billion anyway, like $3 billion plus, I don't know, $5 billion maybe. And I was the sixth guy. There were 5 partners, and there was me. And I would hedge and trade the portfolio for the derivatives portfolio for the entire book. And in my own account, but I was really trying to monetize my ability to manage the master account. After a year and a half and not getting any bonuses for that, I was told that I didn't have what it takes to make partner, which was devastating at the time. In hindsight, was the best thing that ever happened to me. A lot of them, Raj is still in jail. So everything happens for a reason, even if you don't understand it at the time. But I left there. I resigned and I went to Kramer Berkowitz, where I was really connected to my friend Jeff Berkowitz, who I'm still friends with. Very good guy, very smart guy, and Jim, obviously. And that overlap lasted a year. Jim went his own way, and we managed the fund. We had a very good year in 2000, I think 37%. 2001, we were doing quite well until 9/11. And even after the stocks reopened, we were having a nice year, but it wasn't what it once was. So Minionville emerged shortly thereafter, and it's been in my, my pro bono work ever since.
Well, I thank you for that pro bono work. It's been extremely valuable to me and a lot of other people that I know. I got to ask you too. The buzz and banter, that you created was such an awesome feature of Minionville, and it was literally the predecessor for financial Twitter. You talk about creating an online financial community. Buzz and banter was that without all the trolls.
Yeah.
So how does it feel to have essentially invented, Twitter, finance Twitter?
Yeah, no, trust me, I think about that sometimes. We made the decision in our infinite wisdom to keep it behind a firewall, to wall in the community, and we had a very robust, powerful community, but it wasn't at scale. And the fatal flaw of Minionville, I think, was the focus on quality over quantity, and really staying away from acrimony as a whole. So, when it came to the subscription business, which we ultimately sold, it was out of the realization that in order to get these clicks, you got to, talk about, you got to scare people, or talk about, disparagingly of people. And that just was never really the focus of Minionville, or really the culture. So it was best to sell that. And listen, Minionville, that's all we sold of Minionville. We still have, it's been dormant more or less for a couple of years, but we still have, the website, the content's up, and the characters, Hoofy and Boo, of course. So I've been trying to figure out kind of what to do with that property as I transition into this new arena. And we're talking to some people. I think ultimately, in my infinite wisdom, I think that it would be a great pivot to cannabis wellness and cannabis lifestyle and wellness. But I don't have the bandwidth to be a part of any of that process, because I'm going to focus full time on CB1. I'm not talking to some people that are interested in doing that, and so stick around. There may be a second coming of Minionville just yet, but it really was one of the real catalysts for me really exploring the cannabis space. And when I talk about the cannabis space, I'm not talking about getting high. I'm talking about getting well, right? And I think what I'm very excited about is that most people, when they think about the cannabis industry, they really think about Cheech and Chong and getting high. And the most liberals would, out there would talk about, I smoked a vape pen at dinner on Saturday night, and, he. But what really got me focused on this space was really the wellness benefits of cannabis, and really educating myself and others on a certain facts that have been really convoluted over the course of time, and researching the history of cannabis and the government efforts and the research that's only been allowed for finding negative effects, and there's been no research allowed for finding positive effects, and all this other stuff, and reefer madness. There's been such a brainwash going on in society, and listen, full caveat: if you're under 21 and you're smoking marijuana, every single time you do it is additive to the damage that it's going to do to your development. So it's really, really bad for you if you're still developing. But as you get through maturity, as you get more mature and get older, the wellness aspect of this is really, really powerful. And I'm talking about, studies, preclinical studies, sure, but again, you couldn't study cannabis for the medical benefits and the cannabinoid receptors that we all have in our bodies. All human beings, all dogs, cats, plants, all have these receptors in our body that basically crave the cannabinoids that are found in cannabis, right? So, the research now that's starting to get done from the outside in, and I'm talking about overseas, Canada, Israel, Great Britain, Australia, Germany, all have a competitive advantage over the U.S., but certainly what they're finding and the research is finding, and I'm very, very happy to have connected with my partner at CB1 who cured himself from epileptic seizure disorder 8 years ago and has subsequently read pretty much every peer review and any sort of publications or abstracts that have come out, because again, it's not covered on Wall Street, it's not taught in schools. So this is a very frontier-oriented, sort of exploration process. But there have been tremendous breakthroughs that they found for childhood epilepsy, for existence, and cutting epileptic seizures in children by 50%, by half, right? And it's the difference, really, Jesse, and this is essential to our thesis, is that the FDA has to control this process, right? And so we're really focused on the clinical path, because when you look at what they're doing for schizophrenia, what they're doing for cancer, what they're doing, across the spectrum, and there's a whole plethora of indications that are being worked on, we genuinely believe this is impact investing. This is a wellness play. This is a healthcare disruption play. And understanding that, most people who are focused on cannabis are really looking at the wrong side of the pipe, no pun intended. But really, the medical efficacy is really going to, in our opinion, if the FDA doesn't use it, they lose it to the states. If they lose it to the states, these are drugs that you buy at dispensaries. If it goes through the FDA, it's medicine that is prescribed by a doctor that is covered by insurance. It's a completely different conversation in terms of an industrial evolution and all the supply chain that goes with that. And that's where we think it's going, and it has to go that way. There's too much money involved for the FDA not to own it. And ultimately we see, the adult market, the adult use market, and the medical market merging under the auspice of the FDA. And if you want to call it medicine, you have to go through this route. So we think that's going to happen. It's going to dilute a lot of the current marijuana investments, whether it's the growers, whether it's the dispensaries. Not all of them. There's still going to be good money to be made, but the market's going to change. And the only way to really play this in the U.S. That I found is to find the stocks that are going to benefit from the medical side as an emerging healthcare play, and really focusing on those elements on the biotech side of the equation, and extrapolating that food chain down the curve, so to speak.
It's fascinating to me, and it reminds me of Linus Pauling, who wrote Vitamin C and the Common Cold, and he wrote that book 50, 60 years ago or something, and literally in the last several weeks, this doctor discovered that intravenous vitamin C very likely cures sepsis, which is a huge problem in hospitals. But Linus Pauling wrote 50, 60 years ago, because this is kind of a generic commodity, nobody has any interest in trying to monetize it. And then there are huge special interests, that have a huge interest in it not being, discovered for that reason. And so it just reminds me, cannabis has been around for so long. It's so available.
It's been around for 10,000 years. 10,000 years this has been around, and for a reason, right? I mean, and so you talked about the indications, right? So I talked about epilepsy. Cancer. I think cannabis kills cancer is going to be the headline of the decade. I truly believe that. And it was funny. I just had a conversation with a doctor who said, well, I'm not seeing it in the medical community or, boots on the ground. And I said, well, you wouldn't, because it's illegal. But right now, in terms of the work that's being done preclinical, from Parkinson's to opioid addiction to cystic fibrosis, glaucoma, autism, neuropathic pain, multiple sclerosis. I mean, there's so many migraines, pancreatic cancer, Tourette's syndrome. It's really amazing to me that this is not getting more press. And you're starting to see, and I've been monitoring this sector for a long time, and you're not just seeing the press now in the fringe publications. You're seeing it in Forbes, the Washington Post. You're seeing it in U.S. News and World Report. And I think the difference now, Jesse, and that was people were saying, well, why now, right? This has been going on for for as long as you can remember, generations anyway in the U.S. Why now? Why is it going to be now when the government has such a hard on to keep this as a Schedule 1? And I would offer that the internet is making this possible now because people all over the world can now share their results with each other and get visibility on it. And it's hard to put those horses back in the barn, especially when you're starting to, clinically prove through 2 phase 3 trials that this is cutting epileptic seizures in children by 50%. And that's not getting kids high. Again, 95% of the compounds in cannabis are non-psychoactive. So this is genuinely a disruptive medicine. And it's projected to shave upwards of $4 billion initially off the prescription drug trade, which is why the pharma lobby is spending so much money, why the spirits lobby is spending so much money. It's already impacting the makers of alcohol and beer, and that's going to continue. So sure, there needs to be parameters set up around the adult use market, obviously, just like there are parameters set up around the alcohol market. But alcohol never cured cancer or is pointing in that direction. Alcohol never cut epileptic seizures in children by 50%, yet that's legal. Cigarettes, zero benefit. It actually kills you. Cigarettes kill you, and they're illegal. This is making people better. It's promoting homeostasis in the body. I've even read some studies recently where smoking marijuana is actually good for your lungs because you're injecting all of those cannabinoids into your lungs. It does not harm you. There's no evidence that it harms you. The most adverse effects that are being found in these clinical trials, diarrhea, and maybe some liver enzymes, but as opposed to the pathway that's currently in the marketplace where they put you on a drug, then they give you another drug to offset the adverse effects of that drug, then you're on another drug to offset the adverse effects of those drugs, and before you know it, you're on 5 drugs, and right. That's not healthy, right? So you have to unwind from the conventional wisdom that Western medicine is the cure-all and open your mind to the notion that this is something that's been around for as long as human beings are registered on Earth, right? There's even reference to it in the Bible, the green herb, right? So, there's a reason, even if it hasn't been fully understood. We use the analogy that, people smoke marijuana forever because it made them, the net benefit was something that they felt better about, right? It was like throwing spaghetti against the wall and not really understanding why it's different every time, but that there's something about it. You don't know the difference between indica and sativa, but you don't care, right? Because pot is pot. Pot's not pot. So the science and the technology is now caught up to the fact that you can pull that spaghetti off the wall. You can now take that strand of spaghetti, you can plug it into a particular receptor on your body and really circumvent the pathway for drugs that currently exists, that you take this medicine and you hope that the bloodstream carries it to where it needs to go, and it may or may not work, and if it does, you're probably going to need other medicine to offset that, and so on. So the science is irrefutable, and that's only going to become more demonstrated. So and I know I'm being verbose, but so we look at the sort of evolution of the space, and we say, well, it has to be led by medical efficacy, right? That is our thesis. All right, it's going to go from the medical efficacy route, clinical data, to the FDA approval, and from once the FDA approves use and demonstrates that there is medical efficacy, the DEA has 90 days to reschedule by law. Once that decriminalization happens, institutions, which have been kind of banging on the gates, are going to bum rush the space, in my opinion. You'll see the sector reflect that, which will allow for more testing, more indications, and so on. And that's going to be, we think that this is really going to be one of the biggest industries in America by the time my kids are grown up. And it's going to be a multifaceted industry, from real estate to consulting, obviously products, finance, cultivation, dispensaries. Biotechnology, which is big on our current focus, agriculture technology. Think about it from a farming lens, Jesse. This is farming 2.0. This is a renaissance for the farm, for Middle America. So ultimately, cat, tractor, and deer are going to be cannabis plays. So it really is something that is it's really misunderstood. Although we are seeing the demographics really shift, 62% of Americans favor it, which ultimately is going to really guide the federal government's hand, because when the opposition is aging out, and so ultimately there needs to be, if you want to be elected, you have to speak to the people, and the people are speaking loudly on this.
Well, I think of a few things. We say that it's inevitably seems like it's marching in that direction towards legalization, but also other uses. And you talk about the opposition aging out, and I think about the applications for it, medicinally for aging people. So I really kind of opened my eyes to it. When I'm a fan of mixed martial arts, and I was watching the post-fight press conference. I think it was Diaz and McGregor, and Diaz pulls out a vape pen, and the reporters say, "What are you doing?" He says, "Don't worry, it's just cannabinoid oil that helps me with pain, and everybody should use this for pain." And I thought, my mom suffers from arthritis, and there's no THC in it, and maybe there's an application for her arthritis.
Well, you said that laughing, but let me tell you something. There has been research done on Alzheimer, reversing the aging process, and I'm telling you, I wrote this on Twitter last month. I said, not only do I think cannabis will kill cancer, I think it is a legitimate fountain of youth. I don't know if you saw that or not, but yes, I genuinely believe that. Because you think about, from a cosmetic application, the ability for women to put a certain extract on their face and remove wrinkles. Tell me what, I don't know what it's like out there by you, but where I live on Long Island, I don't know a woman that wouldn't buy that product, okay? And that's just from a vanity standpoint. Older people, as their brains start to degenerate, cannabis has been shown to increase activity, reduce pain, and really fight off the degradation of the mind. So I do believe this is a fountain of youth, and I think older people, are certainly. I know older people who swear by it. It makes them laugh. It creates, it builds, it generates creativity. It promotes homeostasis. It's a sleep aid. There's so many reasons why this not only should be legal, but should be, a genuine industry. And granted, when I first went on TV and talked about this in 2012, following a 2010 article I wrote, I had said, listen, from a pragmatic standpoint, it's going to increase tax revenues, it's going to create jobs, it's going to lower the crime rate, and it's going to reduce prison populations. That in and of itself, I think, is powerful. But if you can make a case, as is being made right now, that this is curing unmet medical conditions and really battling against a lot of the ailments that our population is facing, and we talk about this all the time internally. It's a very it's because of the processed foods and all of the other shit that we put into our body on a daily basis, and why our country's obese. It's really we've heard the term thrown around. It's an endocannabinoid depression out there, because all of the processed foods and all of the fatty foods that we're eating is really crippling the system. And what cannabis is doing, or the cannabinoids in cannabis are doing, are they're really replicating our own body's ability to produce these very same things. So intuitively, it makes sense. And now finally, the technology, the science, and the research is being done to prove it out. And there are so many barbarians at the gate in terms of clinical applications, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That's really the exciting part of the business, and it's one that's morally defensible. I'll tell you, because even still, like when we go on some of these meetings, like we get asked, "Did you bring any samples?" Ha ha. And it's funny, yes, but that sort of speaks to the point of how cannabis is misunderstood and how we've been programmed to receive that this is the devil's drug and this is really harmful, and it is if you're under 21. But there is increasing proof that it is not only not bad for you over 21, but it is actually quite good for you. And I think when people start to understand that, and that's probably going to happen, it's going to have to be through an FDA process and a decriminalization process for the institutions to get involved. But that's going to become more and more understood given the internet and the connectivity across the globe right now.
Yeah, you ask, what it's like here in Oregon, and it's recreationally legal and has been for a while. But I work out at a gym that's right here by my house, and it's all Olympic athletes who train for mostly winter sports, but endurance sports. And on tap at the gym, they have a cannabinoid infused type of like a kombucha drink, and they all drink it and they swear by it. And so these are people who are elite athletes and take incredible care of their bodies and are very careful about what they put into it, and it's something that they're all using now. So I think it's especially here in Oregon, it's going places, but I think it's inevitable that this trend is going to take over the country. So
yeah, well, but understand also, I think sequencing is going to be an incredibly important element of success, right? And I look at it much like the .com, and having traded through Y2K, there's going to be a lot of pets.coms and there's going to be very few Amazon.coms. But the ones that are the Amazon.coms, you just want to hold on to for life, and and it's going to create a tremendous amount of wealth in this country. And we're not, we're not looking at this. Our thesis isn't necessarily predicated on medical only. We think from a sequencing standpoint that has to be sort of the entree, and that's going to, right now it's a very clean seam that's sitting under the curve of cannabis. And I believe that this is going to sort of morph into the tip of an arrow that's going to lead the space higher. So really, it's going to change. The landscape's going to change. The economics are going to change. There's 40 new licensed producers coming online in the next 6 months. It's really going to, So I believe cannabis as even though there's a projected huge mismatch in supply versus demand out for a couple of years right now by a factor of 8, I do believe that marijuana is ultimately going to be a commodity, and ultimately it's going to trade on the SIBO. So it's just getting to, from A to B to C, and understanding that each step, is a focus into itself.
Well, you bring up a great point. One of the most, people ask me all the time, how do I take advantage, what's the next big thing? And even figuring out what the next big thing is difficult. But even when you do, trying to profit from that trend is even more difficult. There's a great video I show people, the car boom and how many car companies went out of business, even while, car sales were exploding. And Charlie Munger talks about, what's the biggest economic innovation of the 20th century was air conditioning. Well, who really profited from, air conditioning and allowing all the southern states to work through summer? What is your process in going and looking at separating the companies that are going to effectively take advantage of this trend versus the ones that are, also rans?
Well, it's a filtering process. So, I'm not looking to invest in private equity. I think there's inherent risk in private equity right now because the landscape is changing. And I also don't like the idea of buying something and then it's worth what the next guy's willing to pay. And I'm married to a particular thesis, come hell or high water, which is likely, you're investing in a business and you hope that business is on the right path in terms of monetizing and profitability. As a first level of disclosure, we look at companies that have listed, right? Because the listing protocols have are pretty rigorous, very rigorous, and there are different levels of course. But where they list is a big tell in terms of the boxes they had to check to get listed on those exchanges. So that's the first layer of defense. And obviously through this approach, we're not touching the plant. We're not moving the plant across state lines. We're just investing in companies that we believe are going to benefit from the overarching trend, whether it's the cannabinoid biotechs, whether it's the nutraceutical therapies or the pet food industry, which is huge, that are now infusing, I should say, CBD. I bought CBD for my dog because he's a little anxious and he's he's more mellow now. I give CBD to my kids, non-psychoactive, but it promotes homeostasis and wellness in the body. So your analogy to vitamin C is a great one. And I think that, this will be analogous to that to some degree. There's going to be a proactive application, right, in taking CBD as we're doing. And there's going to be a reactive proposition in taking the roots and really the core research and applying it to unmet medical conditions. So, and of course, is going to be obviously the adult use market, like you spoke to, and a lot of people. A lot of people are enjoying that market just for the enjoyment's sake, and again, if alcohol and cigarettes are legal, I'm not quite sure how a plant that is helping people get better and promoting wellness is illegal, but that's going to change. So the listing protocols are our first, and then we're really looking across. We have a process. I'm not going to share the entire process, obviously, but it includes looking across unmet medical conditions, finding these companies that have the right patents, have the right people, have the right cash on hand, and really have the right focus in their work. And that's it's a process, but it's a one that has served us in good stead so far as we get ready to move forward.
Well, you have been following and tweeting about and telling me about GW Pharma for a long time. It's a stock I looked at. I even have a friend here in Bend who works for private equity, analyzing potential pharma deals for them. And I said, look at GW Pharma for me and tell me what you think, because I don't know how to look at it. And, I waited too long, and I think the stock doubled a couple weeks after that. Is that still one of your favorite ideas in the space?
It is, and in full disclosure, I have a position in the name. But, listen, the fact that that the street is valuing the entire company on the Epidiolex launch, which is going to be a blockbuster, and I think the off-label use is the unknown, right? Because once it's prescribed, it was actually very intelligent how they did it in indicating for an orphan disease and getting fast-tracked and all that stuff. The off-label use we think is going to be pretty powerful, but the street's only valuing that. The company on February 7th said that their primary endpoints for glioma, which is brain cancer, which is one of the most aggressive forms of cancer, were healthy, were very good, but they couldn't release secondary endpoints yet, which is overall survival, because so many people are still living. The ASCO conference was this past couple days, and they did not provide those secondary endpoints, which was a disappointment to me, given that I thought they might. But through a larger lens, it's quite positive that these people are still living with brain cancer. And they guided in February 7th to weeks to months. We're going to have that more data in weeks to months. It's now June 6th, 4 months later, and we still haven't heard the secondary endpoints, which we think is very powerful. So there's that and the whole patent portfolio. And I know there's going to be some legal wrangling come year end, but you have to understand the story behind GW, not to get too off topic, but it's very fascinating. In the 90s, the US and the UK both ran studies to demonstrate the medical efficacy of cannabis. Both determined that there was medical efficacy potential. The US returned to the war on drugs and kept it Schedule 1. The UK turned around and underwrote GW Pharmaceuticals. So they've been doing this since the mid 90s. They've got a huge lead on the research side. So, yes, I do believe it's a buy or build for Big Pharma. It was interesting that Goldman came out and initiated coverage with a buy at 138. And also I've been on the street almost 30 years, and I've never seen an M&A target on an initial buy recommendation, initial buy research report. So the fact that they put on a 349 M&A target tells me that they see the buy build element to this. The stock's trading at 98 right now. So if you told me back at 138 that you could buy this stock at 98 with really nothing changing and the story actually getting better, in our opinion, I would say, that's a pretty good sale. I would buy buy the stock at 35% discount to current price, and I have. But from the catalysts are unknown. There's also a case to be made that there could be a lot more competition for them very soon. But they have such a huge first mover advantage that this is genuinely the cream of the crop in the space. So yes, I like it. And it's been painful since it's grinded lower since trading, getting upgraded and trading to 130, 138, 137 back in September. But the story hasn't changed. It's actually getting better because it's getting cheaper.
Do you think that's maybe it has to do with the election, since then and potential, short-term, turnaround in the legalization movement or some pressure on that? Just like an anti-cannabis by the administration.
Going back to the psychology, yes, I do. And I think, honestly, I'm very, very, extremely, extremely happy that this administration's throwing a wet blanket over the space because it's driving down the prices of cannabis plays and providing a better entry point, in my opinion. Unless you believe that cannabis is not going to happen, and I would argue that it's already happening in a lot of countries outside of the U.S., so there is that whole Europe play, there's a whole Australia play, there's a lot of different plays, but the U.S. has to come around because there's too much money for them not to, and ultimately that's going to happen. There's going to be a banking mechanism, there's going to be a federal tax, and it's going to be in my opinion, really a grand bargain of sorts between the states and the government, if you want to call it medicine as opposed to calling it drugs. And I do believe that's going to be the lens that ultimately, in time, it's going to take years and years, but ultimately I do believe that that it's really all going to fall under the FDA purview, because it's all going to be a treatment of some sort. But that's going to take a lot of trials and a lot of failures and a lot of successes, so it's going to be very volatile. But you have to have a point of view if you want to make money, and I have a point of view that this is really at the early innings of a very long game.
Yeah, and then that's the kind of the pharma medical side. On the recreational side, do you have any thoughts on? I think you've told me in the past, that, and I think about, Warren Buffett says, if I give you $1 billion, could you come in and compete against whatever business it is that you're looking at? And I think you mentioned to me, like Philip Morris and Altria at some point. These guys are going to get into the act on the recreational side.
Archer Daniels, Monsanto also. And, listen, just follow the money. I found just follow the money and you'll get to the answer. And there's way, way, way too much pent-up demand globally for this not to be embraced as an industrial, and think about it, hemp, the industrial uses of hemp. From car doors. I mean, look at what's out there. You got opioids, which are killing people. You have cannabis, which are improving the wellness of people. You have hemp, which is all natural, versus plastic, which is not all natural. And understanding that the Paris Accord, we're one of 3 countries now not in the Paris Accord, and maybe. We want to negotiate, whatever it is. But, if you care about the environment, which I believe a lot of people do, I certainly do, there are benefits to using this all natural substance. across a whole scope of different emerging industries. And I mentioned the nutraceutical side. We're watching what Nestle's doing with a lot of with their PEP and other compounds. And we do believe that CBD infused is going to be a rite of passage for pretty much every food group. I've already had conversations with certain potato chip companies. There is going to be sort of this, jumping the shark, so to speak. And, but I'll tell you what the dangerous part about this arena right now is that there's so much supply coming coming online with the growers that, do you want to really invest in the commodities side? A lot of the deals that I looked at, were really a function of, you can make 8-10% if you get your money back. The economics weren't good. The risk reward wasn't good, in my opinion, which is really the catalyst behind really, taking this dive and moving into a space and being able to build a diversified approach to a particular theme and thesis, which is the wellness thesis. And, really genuinely, not from an optics standpoint, but genuinely believing that this is a wellness play and this is a healthcare disruption play. It's really not hard to get excited about it.
Well, I think you make a great point in pointing to the wellness applications, because everybody's focused on recreational uses and possibly the more profitable and the bigger positive impact on society is through these wellness.
And again, that's the path. That's a pathway to legitimacy, because the FDA. Again, it has to use it or lose it. There's a chance, I would say about a 20% chance, but there's a chance that the government is going to turn around when GW files for Epidiolex, and they're going to say, okay, well, we're going to make CBD legal, decriminalize CBD, but keep cannabis as a Schedule 1, which is fine, because a lot of these other indications that are coming through the trials right now have a very healthy THC component. I'm talking about the glioma trials in particular, that it's going to be, it's a matter of time before they're going to have to bite the bullet. And once that happens, the DEA has to reschedule. Once that happens, the institutions get involved, and and off we go. So that's the thesis. And listen, it could be wrong. I've been wrong plenty in my career, but this feels different to me. So we're excited about about the space.
Well, Todd, you're very generous with your thinking about this stuff and the research and stuff that you're following. Is Twitter the best place for people to keep up with this project?
Yes, and listen, to be clear, this is not a solicitation. I actually, would actually err to the side of not accepting investments from people who heard about it through this, just because, from a legal lens, you have to be crispy clean in terms of how you operate. And I've always operated, with a healthy degree of separation between the proverbial line. So this is not a solicitation for investment. It's really, we're excited about the space. We think we have a pretty unique approach to how we view it, and a very positive approach to how we view it. And for those who are interested, we update our Twitter account with the headlines that we think matter to the wellness thesis, and that's at cb1cap.com. Or at CB1Cap, I guess, would be the Twitter handle. And it's really fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. And I encourage people to really understand it, because I think education is critical to the success of investors, as well as a lot of the patients who are going to benefit from this tremendous research.
Well, as you've demonstrated with Minionville, and as long as I've known you, you have a desire to share things that you think are valuable with people, and things that do good in a broader sense. And so I'm really grateful to you in that respect, and also for taking the time to share your thoughts today on the show. And I wish you the best of luck with the new venture.
I appreciate it, Jess, and you're one of the few people I pay attention to what you say. So I really appreciate you inviting me on and having an opportunity to connect again.
Kind of you, Todd. Thanks.
All right, buddy. Take care.
And that does it for another episode of Super Investors in the Art of Worldly Wisdom. For notes and links regarding our conversation today, please visit thefelderreport.com. And until next time, buy low, sell high.
there's nothing staring back at him. At that moment, a man finds his character. And that is what keeps him out of the abyss.